My name is Eveline Hart, and I'm 42 years old. I never thought a single chair could undo decades of composure. But sometimes it takes only one splintering crack to remind you how invisible people think you are. 3 years ago, after my husband Richard passed, I inherited the big Victorian house we'd restored together, the kind with creaking floors, tall windows, and staircases that sighed with every step. It had been our dream home, but after he was gone, the place felt cavernous, echoing with memories too loud for one person to bear. So I rented the upper floors and moved into the garden-level suite. The rent covered the taxes and upkeep, and the privacy gave me room to grieve. To keep things tidy and anonymous, I listed the property through a small management agency I'd created years earlier, Properties, just my initials. The tenants never saw the name Eveline Hart on anything. To them, I was simply the woman who came by to change light bulbs and water plants. It suited me. Being underestimated has its conveniences. My latest tenants were 4 ambitious 20-somethings, who treated ambition like perfume loud enough for everyone to smell it. Tara, the ringleader, ran a lifestyle blog about luxury on a budget. Miles, her boyfriend, was in finance and liked to drop the word portfolio into every conversation. Brendan, an aspiring musician, contributed mostly noise and charm, and Alicia followed wherever Tara led. They weren't bad people exactly, just careless, born into a generation that confuses confidence with character. For the first few months, I stayed out of sight. I fixed what broke, collected mail, and smiled when they remembered to thank me. But they rarely did. Once, Tara asked if I could make myself scarce during a photo shoot. Another time, Miles left a note that read, "Please don't park your old car out front, it ruins the aesthetic." I said nothing. Quiet people learn early that silence gathers more information than arguments ever do. Then came the dinner. It was a Friday night in early spring. They were celebrating Brendan's record deal, which, as I later learned, was merely an unpaid gig at a downtown bar. Tara, ever the hostess, insisted I join them for dinner. "You've been so helpful," she said with that syrupy tone people use when they want to look generous. "Come eat with us. We'll even save you a seat." I almost declined. But something in me, perhaps curiosity, perhaps boredom, said yes. Maybe I wanted to see how they lived when they weren't performing for social media. When I arrived, the dining room looked like a page from a glossy magazine. Candles flickered, glasses gleamed, laughter rang out. They had set 6 chairs around the table, 5 upholstered ones and 1 wobbly wooden relic shoved to the corner. "That's for you, Eveline," Tara said brightly. "Sorry, the matching ones are taken." I smiled politely and took my seat. The chair creaked beneath me, but I didn't mind until halfway through dinner, when Brendan told a joke, Miles slapped the table, and the chair beneath me snapped. I went down hard, the sound sharp as thunder against tile. For a second, silence, then laughter. Loud, uncontrollable laughter. "Oh my God, Eveline," Tara gasped between giggles. "I swear we didn't know it was broken." Miles grinned. "I guess we really owe you a new one, huh?" Even Alicia laughed, though hers was small and nervous. I could feel heat crawl up my neck, but I forced a smile. "It's fine," I said, brushing off my dress. "I'll take care of it." I gathered the splintered pieces myself while they watched. They didn't stop me. They just kept laughing. When I returned to my suite downstairs, I sat in the dark for a long time. I wasn't crying. I was calculating. Every repair receipt, every late payment, every minor rule they'd broken flickered through my mind like ledger entries. They thought the humiliation ended at that dinner table, but they'd only written the opening line of their own downfall. I remembered Richard's favorite saying, "Power isn't loud, Eve. It's the quiet confidence of knowing you can end a storm with one decision." That night, I decided to stop pretending I didn't own the storm. The next morning, I walked through the house before they woke. Sunlight filtered through dusty glass, illuminating the scuff marks on the banister and a wine stain on the rug. Little wounds they'd left on what used to be our sanctuary. I ran my hand over the carved newel post Richard had built and whispered, "They don't deserve you." By noon, I was in my office, the one room no tenant ever entered, opening the safe that held every legal document tied to the house. The deed gleamed under the light, my name printed clear as day. Eveline Marie Hart. Below it, the signature of my lawyer, the same man who had told me years ago, keep ownership separate from management, it protects you. I smiled at that memory. Protection, yes, but now it offered something sweeter, revelation. That evening, I passed the tenants in the driveway. Tara waved her phone. Eveline, can you make sure the recycling's out tomorrow? We're busy filming content. Of course, I said softly. I'll make sure everything's taken care of. And I would. Just not in the way they expected. I went to bed early that night, the cracked chair still on my mind. Funny how something so small could expose so much truth. They thought it was just wood and nails giving way under my weight, but it was really patience-breaking. Before I turned out the light, I wrote a single note to myself on the notepad by my bed. Next time they sit down, let them wonder who bought the chair. Because the next time we met around that table, I wouldn't be the one looking up at them. People like to say that a house becomes a home only when it's filled with love. I've learned it can just as easily become a mirror, one that reflects the character of whoever walks its halls. The morning after that dinner, I stood at the bottom of the staircase with a cup of coffee, listening to the muffled sounds above, laughter, footsteps, a door slamming. They had already shaken off the embarrassment of the night before. I hadn't. The image of that broken chair replayed itself over and over: Tara's laughter, Miles's grin, Brendan's careless joke. The sound of splintering wood echoed like a reminder of how little they valued the space that held them. I moved through the rooms slowly, like I was walking through a stranger's house. The sunlight revealed fingerprints on the walls, rings of wine on the coffee table, and an empty bottle shoved behind a couch cushion. They treated this place like a hotel suite they'd never have to check out of. Each scuff mark on the hardwood felt personal. Richard and I had sanded those floors together until our hands ached. We'd argued about stain colors, laughed at our mistakes, built a life here plank by plank. Every mark they left felt like erasing him, piece by piece. I could almost hear Richard's voice beside me. You can't teach respect to people who think they already own the world. He was right. But you could show them consequences. I pulled open the drawer of the small roll-top desk in the hallway where I kept house records. Inside were folders labeled by year, receipts for every repair, every tax payment, every insurance update. They were tidy, ordered, deliberate, everything those tenants weren't. I ran my finger along the edges, then stopped at a thicker file. The lease agreements. I carried it to the kitchen table, sat down, and began reading. Clause 5 amperes. Tenant shall not hold gatherings exceeding 10 guests without prior written consent of owner. Clause 8 c. Tenant shall maintain property in good order. Damages caused by negligence will result in forfeiture of deposit and possible termination. Clause 9b. Repeated disturbances or disrespect toward property staff will constitute breach of contract. Every word was a seed of authority waiting to sprout. I underlined them slowly, my pen pressing hard enough to indent the page. They'd broken every one. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is loud, fleeting, messy. What I felt was colder clarity, sharpened to a fine edge. I could see the next steps forming with the same precision I used to plan my classroom lessons back when I taught. Gather evidence, present facts, let the conclusion speak for itself. Simple. That afternoon, Tara called down the stairwell. Eveline, we're heading out for the weekend. Think you could water the plants? And maybe sign for a package if it comes? Of course, I answered, smiling to myself. I'll take care of everything. As their car pulled out of the driveway, I went upstairs with my camera phone. It wasn't snooping, it was documentation. The sink overflowed with dishes crusted in sauce. A candle had burned so low that wax had spilled down the antique sideboard, hardening like tears. The living room rug bore a dark stain, coffee or wine, I couldn't tell, and one leg of the coffee table wobbled. I took photographs from every angle, each click of the shutter a quiet promise that I wouldn't let this house be disrespected any longer. When I was done, I walked into the master bedroom, the one they never let me enter for cleaning. It smelled faintly of perfume and smoke. Tara's vanity overflowed with makeup, jewelry, and open containers. Across the room, Miles's laptop sat open on a desk, displaying an email chain titled, "New Investment Prospects, Potential Property Purchase." I leaned closer and read a line that made me laugh out loud. "Once we get this place cleaned up, I'll have enough saved to buy a house of our own." Landlord, here's such a pushover. A pushover. I whispered the word, tasting it like something bitter. Maybe I had been. But only until now. By evening, the sun had dipped low enough to cast golden light across the banister. I followed it down to my suite and spread the photos across the dining table. The house looked wounded in them, my house, our house. The decision came easily then. I'd been polite long enough. Respect isn't begged for, it's enforced. I called Mr. Dalton, my lawyer, who had handled Richard's estate and every property matter since. "It's Eveline," I said. "I need to discuss a lease termination." His voice warmed. "I thought this day might come. You finally ready to stop being everyone's favorite doormat?" "I'm ready," I said. "Completely." He chuckled. "Good. Bring me the documentation Monday morning. We'll make sure every T is crossed." After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of the same wine they'd spilled upstairs and sat in Richard's old armchair. The house creaked softly around me. The sound I used to find lonely now felt like agreement. I looked toward the ceiling, to the rooms above where they laughed and slept without a clue. They thought ownership was about status, about who looked richest at the table. They had no idea it was about stewardship, care, patience, responsibility. They'd never learned that the hands that clean the floors may also sign the deeds. The next few days, I moved quietly through my routines. Watering plants, sorting mail, repairing a cracked window pane. But inside, something had shifted. Every step I took echoed with a new certainty. They didn't deserve this house. They didn't deserve its warmth, its history, its hard-earned beauty. One evening, as I trimmed the rose bushes along the porch, a neighbor passed and called out, "Evening, Mrs. Hart. The tenants giving you any trouble?" I smiled, shears still in hand. "Not for much longer." That night I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. When I dreamed, I saw Richard sitting across from me at our old dining table. The broken chair was gone, replaced by one of sturdy oak. He smiled, that quiet, proud smile he always wore when I finally stood up for myself. In the morning, I woke with his words still echoing. People who borrow what they don't respect eventually lose it. And I knew exactly what to do next. Because starting now, I wasn't the caretaker of their comfort, I was the landlord of their lessons. Some lines you draw quietly, in your mind, long before anyone else realizes they've crossed them. For me, that line was drawn the night of their party, the one that pushed my patience from endurance into certainty. It began with music. Loud, pulsing, senseless noise that thudded through the floors like a heartbeat gone wrong. I was sitting downstairs, trying to read, when a bass line rattled the glass in my picture frames. I looked at the clock, 10:17 p.m. I had reminded them about quiet hours just the week before. At first, I thought it might end soon. Parties always do. But this one grew. Laughter turned into shouting. The clinking of glasses became a rhythm of chaos. And then came the unmistakable sound of a bottle smashing against the floor above my head. I set down my book, exhaled slowly, and climbed the stairs. The closer I got, the stronger the smell of alcohol became, sweet, heavy, mixed with perfume and smoke. The living room was packed. Strangers lounged on my antique furniture. A couple danced on the edge of my Persian rug. Someone had propped open the French doors to the balcony, letting in a cold gust that whipped the curtains. When they saw me, some turned away, assuming I was a hired cleaner or relative too polite to leave. But then Tara spotted me and rolled her eyes. "Oh, relax, Eveline," she shouted over the music. "We're just celebrating, no harm done." I looked at the table where they'd set up a makeshift bar, bottles, ice, and sticky red cups scattered across the polished wood Richard had refinished by hand. One of my favorite candlesticks was being used to stir a pitcher of punch. "Your lease forbids parties of this size," I said evenly. You need to end this now. Miles laughed, throwing an arm around Tara. Come on, we're not hurting anything. Besides, the landlord's never around. He's closer than you think, I replied. They didn't hear the warning in my tone. Brendan sauntered over, slurring slightly. Eveline, you're the heart of this place, you know that? You worry too much. Have a drink. He held out a glass, spilling half of it on the rug. No, thank you, I said. I think you've had enough for both of us. That made a few of them laugh. I could feel my composure teetering, but I refused to let it slip. When I turned toward the kitchen, I froze. A chair, the same type as the one that had broken beneath me, was cracked clean across the seat. Another lay tipped over, legs splintered. They were destroying what little reverence this house still held, and they didn't even notice. I stepped closer to the window, reached for my phone, and quietly began to take photos. Evidence. Documentation. My heart was steady, my breathing calm. I moved through the chaos unnoticed. Every flash of my camera a quiet step toward justice. A group near the balcony began chanting Brendan's name. He climbed onto the table, holding a wine bottle like a microphone. To us, he yelled. To our landlord, wherever he is, thanks for letting us live in your palace. The crowd cheered, glasses raised, oblivious to the irony that the owner of that palace was standing in their midst. I slipped back downstairs before the anger could reach my face. My hands trembled, not from rage, but from something colder. Clarity. Back in my suite, I shut the door and turned off the lights. The music above still thumped faintly through the ceiling. I stared at the photos glowing on my phone screen, spilled drinks, cracked furniture, a stranger's cigarette, smoldering in one of Richard's antique ashtrays. Each image was a nail in the coffin of their tenancy. I forwarded everything to Mr. Dalton with a simple message, lease violations documented. He replied within minutes, got them, I'll draft the termination letter Monday. You'll just need to deliver it. For a long while I sat there in the quiet hum of the refrigerator and listened to the muffled chaos above me. I thought about all the times I'd been dismissed by them, by people like them, by the world that sees silence as weakness. But silence is not weakness, it's patience. And patience, when it finally moves, is unstoppable. Sometime after midnight, the noise died down. I heard footsteps stumble down the hall, doors slamming, laughter fading. Then came the sound that truly broke me, a crash, loud and sharp, followed by Tara's voice shrieking, "Oh my God, Miles, what did you do?" I didn't rush upstairs. I waited until morning. When the sun rose, I climbed the steps again, camera in hand. The smell of stale beer and smoke hit me first. Then I saw it. A jagged hole gaped in the wall near the staircase. The banister was cracked where someone had fallen against it. Broken glass littered the floor, and one of the framed photos of Richard and me had been knocked over, the glass shattered but the picture miraculously intact. That image, his smiling face under splintered glass, was all the confirmation I needed. When Tara emerged from her room, bleary-eyed, she froze. Eveline. I can explain. I looked at her without expression. No need, I said. I'll handle it. She opened her mouth again, then seemed to think better of it. I left her standing there, walked outside, and took in a long breath of crisp morning air. The neighborhood was quiet, birds chirping, sunlight glinting on the windows. From the street, the house looked beautiful, grand, dignified, still standing proud despite the damage inside. I ran a hand along the porch railing and whispered, "Don't worry, I'm taking you back." By the time I reached my office, the photographs had been uploaded to a folder labeled simply, "The Party." I wrote the date and the words that marked the beginning of the end. Evidence collected for removal. That evening, as I prepared dinner, I could hear them upstairs again, but softer this time, subdued. Maybe they sensed something had shifted. Maybe the guilt had finally seeped in. It didn't matter. The decision had been made. They had mistaken kindness for submission, patience for permission. But they were about to learn what I had always known. A house doesn't belong to whoever fills it with noise, it belongs to whoever keeps it standing when the noise is gone. Some battles are fought with fists, others with fury. Mine began with a single sheet of paper. 2 days after the chaos of that party, I woke before dawn. The house was silent again, deceptively peaceful. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at my small kitchen table, my phone open to the folder of photos I'd taken that night. Each image told its own story. The broken banister, the hole in the wall, the wine-stained rug, the cracked chair. But together, they formed something far stronger, a case. The tenants were still asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware that the walls around them were about to close in. By 7, I was dressed in my navy blazer and gray slacks, the ones I hadn't worn since Richard's funeral. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My face looked older, sharper somehow. Not cruel, just certain. At 8, I drove to Mr. Dalton's office downtown. He was already waiting with a folder on his desk, his glasses perched low on his nose. "I've drafted the notice," he said, sliding the papers toward me. "Termination due to multiple breaches of contract, noise violations, damage, unauthorized gatherings, and disrespect toward property staff." "That last one's my favorite clause," I said, taking the pen from his hand. He chuckled. "You wrote it yourself, remember? Back when you started EH Properties. You said it was for peace of mind." I smiled faintly. "And now it's for justice." I signed every page with steady strokes. When the pen lifted from the final line, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't triumph, it was release. Dalton leaned back in his chair. "Do you want me to serve it?" I shook my head. "No. I'll deliver it personally." He raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "You've got the legal right, but it's not exactly pleasant." "I want them to see my name," I said simply. "They need to know who they've been laughing at." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right, Eveline, just be careful with your words. Don't let them bait you. You'll win more by staying calm." "I'm very good at calm," I said. Back home, the tenants were stirring when I arrived. I could hear Miles arguing with Tara about bills, Brendan singing off-key in the shower, Alicia whispering on the phone. Life went on as usual, oblivious, comfortable, unearned. I laid the sealed envelopes on the hallway table. One addressed to each of them, the embossed EH Properties logo gleaming at the top. They wouldn't notice the smaller text beneath it, owner, Eveline Hart, not until they bothered to read. Then I waited. By mid-afternoon, I heard Tara's voice echo through the stairwell. "Eveline, there's some mix-up with the property management. Did you get one of these letters?" I walked up slowly, folding my hands in front of me. "Yes, I did. I wrote them." The 4 of them were gathered in the living room, the papers spread across the coffee table like spilled secrets. Miles looked furious, Tara stunned, Alicia on the verge of tears. "What is this?" Miles demanded. "Eviction? You can't do this. Only the owner can." "I am the owner," I said quietly. The words landed like a thunderclap. For a second, no one spoke. Tara blinked. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my purse and withdrew a folded document, the property deed. I placed it gently on the table, next to their letters. "My name," I said, tapping the top line, "is right there. Eveline Hart. This house was mine before any of you ever stepped foot in it. Every rent check you've written, every complaint you've filed, it all came to me." Alicia covered her mouth. "Oh my God!" Miles scoffed, desperate to regain footing. "That's ridiculous. Why would the owner live in the basement like a maid?" "Because she was kind," I said. "And she believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, until they mistook kindness for servitude." He opened his mouth again, but Tara cut him off. "So, you're actually evicting us?" I nodded. "For repeated violations. You've broken almost every rule you agreed to." "But you can't just throw us out," Brendan blurted. "Legally, I can," I replied. "But I'm giving you 7 days to leave voluntarily." "I'm not cruel, Brendan." Just finished. A heavy silence fell. Tara stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes. She looked like she was searching for the right tone, charming, apologetic, defiant, but none of them fit. Finally, she whispered. We didn't know. That's the problem, I said softly. You never cared to. I turned to leave. But Miles's voice stopped me. You can't just walk away after humiliating us. I faced him. You humiliated yourselves. I simply turned on the light. Then I walked downstairs, leaving them in the echo of their own disbelief. In my suite, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. For the first time in months, I could breathe without bitterness clogging my chest. The house was quiet, not peaceful yet, but on its way there. I could hear muffled voices upstairs, arguments, Tara's sharp tone, cutting through the air. They were unraveling, turning on each other. Part of me pitied them, another part didn't. Everyone has to learn that arrogance has rent due. That evening, Alicia knocked on my door. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Mrs. Hart, she said softly, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. We were awful to you. You didn't deserve that. I studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you, Alicia. You still have time to make different choices. 7 days can be long enough to learn. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, and left without another word. When the door closed, I turned my gaze back to the window. The sun had set, and the streetlights bathed the house in a soft amber glow. I thought of Richard again, his laughter, his patience, the way he used to say, Eve, dignity doesn't shout, it stands its ground. I smiled faintly. He would have been proud of me today. I took the signed copies of the eviction notices, placed them neatly in a folder, and locked them in my desk. On the cover, I wrote 3 simple words in careful script. The day everything turned. Because that paper didn't just change their future, it reclaimed mine. And for the first time in years, I felt like the owner of more than a house. I was the owner of my peace. Some moments define you not by what you say, but by how calm you remain while the world around you comes undone. By the end of the week, the energy in the house had shifted entirely. Gone was the easy laughter, the clinking of wine glasses, and the smell of perfume that once floated down the stairwell. In their place was tension thick enough to taste an uneasy quiet that lingered like the pause before a storm. They hadn't left yet, though the deadline loomed. Every morning, I'd hear boxes thudding upstairs and the scrape of furniture being dragged. Sometimes I'd catch fragments of their conversations through the floorboards. This is insane, Tara. Miles's voice one day sharp and strained. She can't legally kick us out that fast. Brendan, another night. And once? Alicia, quietly. Maybe we deserve this. She was right. I had given them 7 days to move out peacefully. On the 7th morning, I woke early and brewed a pot of strong black coffee. The air was heavy with anticipation. Today wasn't just about eviction, it was about closure. By 10, I heard footsteps pacing above me. I slipped on my blazer, pulled my hair into a neat bun, and walked upstairs. The living room was in disarray. Half-packed boxes littered the floor, clothes spilled from open suitcases, and tension crackled in the air like static. Tara was the first to notice me. She froze mid-sentence, her expression tightening. Eveline, she said, voice stiff. We were going to call you. We just need a little more time. Miles folded his arms, trying to look in control. Yes. The moving truck fell through. We'll be out by next week. No harm done. I looked around the room. You've had a week already, I said evenly. And plenty of warnings before that. Brendan stepped forward, his charm worn thin. Come on, Mrs. Hart, you've made your point. We get it, you own the place. Congratulations. But kicking us out right before the holidays? That's, justice doesn't check the calendar, I interrupted. Tara's cheeks flushed. Do you even know how hard it is to find another place right now? We've been looking non-stop. Then maybe you should have treated the last one better, I replied softly. For a moment, silence. Then, Miles snapped, his voice cutting through the air like glass. This is ridiculous. You think because you've got a deed and a lawyer you can treat us like criminals? We paid you rent, didn't we? Yes, I said. And in return, you were given a home, a privilege you abused. Tara scoffed, crossing her arms. We made one mistake. And you act like you're some moral guardian. One mistake? I took a step forward, my calm, measured, and deliberate. You held parties that destroyed property. You mocked the person maintaining your home. You filmed my humiliation for your followers. And you treated this house like a prop for your vanity. That's not one mistake. That's a pattern. Her jaw tightened, guilt flickering across her face before pride buried it again. Alicia, standing near the staircase, finally spoke. She's right, Tara. We were awful. Tara turned on her. Oh, don't start now. You're just saying that because you feel guilty. I do feel guilty, Alicia said quietly. Because she was kind to us, and we made fun of her. We broke her things, her peace, and she still gave us a chance to leave with dignity. Brendan muttered under his breath. Some dignity. I looked at him. You'd be surprised how many people would have thrown you out without a word. Miles rubbed his temples, pacing. Look, Mrs. Hart, I can pay for the damages. Double the deposit, even. Let's just start over. I'm not interested in your money, I said. Money can't buy respect. He gave a bitter laugh. Spoken like someone who doesn't need it. Spoken like someone who learned the hard way that it doesn't fix everything. I replied. I turned toward the window then, gazing at the garden below. The rose bushes Richard had planted were still blooming, their petals trembling in the wind. He always said they reminded him of me, soft edges hiding quiet resilience. When I turned back, my voice was gentle but firm. I'm not angry with any of you. Not anymore. But this house deserves better. Miles stared at the floor, jaw clenched, while Brendan muttered curses under his breath. I reached into my bag and set a manila envelope on the coffee table. This is your final inspection form, I said. Fill it out, sign it, and leave your keys in the mailbox downstairs when you're done. Tara frowned. You really planned this down to the detail, didn't you? Yes, I said simply. That's what people who care do, they plan ahead. Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Each second felt heavier than the last. Finally, Alicia broke the silence. Thank you, she whispered, for not being cruel. I nodded once. I don't need to be cruel. Life will teach you what pride can't. Then I turned and walked to the door. My hand rested on the knob for a moment as I glanced back. They looked smaller somehow, not just in stature but in spirit. The arrogance that once filled the room had evaporated, leaving behind only the hollow echo of regret. As I stepped out into the hallway, Tara's voice called after me. Eveline, wait. I paused but didn't turn around. I shouldn't have laughed that night, she said. Her voice was soft, almost breaking. I didn't know what kind of person you really were. You still don't, I said. But maybe one day you will. Then I walked away. Back downstairs, I set my coffee pot on the stove and exhaled deeply. The adrenaline that had kept me steady began to fade, replaced by a strange, quiet satisfaction. I hadn't shouted, hadn't raged, I'd simply stood my ground. And in doing so, I had reclaimed something far greater than authority. Peace. Through the ceiling, I heard movement, the shuffle of boxes, the muted thud of footsteps. They were finally leaving. By dusk, the driveway was filled with suitcases and the fading hum of an engine. I watched from the window as their car pulled away, disappearing into the distance. The house exhaled with me, its walls settling into stillness. I ran my fingers over the kitchen counter, over the grain of wood Richard had sanded himself. They're gone, I whispered. And for the first time in years, I said it. Not in relief but in gratitude. Because what began with humiliation had ended with reclamation, and I wasn't done teaching lessons yet. There's a silence that comes after victory, the kind that feels heavier than noise. But mine didn't last long. Panic has a way of echoing through walls, even after people think they've left quietly. The morning after they were supposed to vacate, I woke before sunrise. The air in the house felt lighter, like the building itself had been holding its breath for weeks and finally exhaled. I made myself a cup of tea and walked through each room one by one, inspecting what remained. They were gone, but their presence lingered. Empty bottles hidden behind curtains, a lipstick stain on a mirror, a forgotten jacket draped over the banister. The house smelled faintly of perfume and dust, of chaos finally cooling into stillness. In the kitchen, I found a folded note on the counter. It was written in Tara's tidy handwriting. "Eveline, we're sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but thank you for giving us time to leave. Maybe someday we'll deserve forgiveness." For a moment, I stood there staring at the words. The bitterness I'd expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, there was something gentler, a quiet acceptance. Maybe humiliation had been my teacher, but dignity had become my guide. Still, not everyone had left so gracefully. At noon, I received a call from Mr. Dalton. "Eveline," he said, "just a heads up. Miles called my office this morning." I frowned. "What does he want?" "To challenge the eviction," Dalton replied. "He's claiming unlawful termination and emotional distress." I almost laughed. Emotional distress? "He broke my house, not the other way around." "He's bluffing," Dalton said. "He doesn't have a case, but people like him, when they lose power, they thrash." Thrash was the perfect word. By that afternoon, my phone started buzzing. Missed calls, unknown numbers. Then one voicemail from Miles himself. "Mrs. Hart, I don't appreciate how you handled things. I have connections, you know. This could get ugly for you. Call me back if you want to settle this privately." I didn't call him back. I forwarded the message straight to Dalton, who later texted, "Empty threats. Sit tight." But I didn't sit still, I cleaned. It was my ritual, my meditation. I opened the windows, let the sunlight in, and worked room by room, restoring order. With each sweep of the broom, the anger left me a little more. Still, I couldn't ignore the sense that something was brewing. That night, as the wind rustled the trees outside, I saw headlights flash across the window. A car idled in front of the house. For a moment, my stomach tightened. Then I saw him, Miles, sitting behind the wheel, staring up at the windows. He didn't get out. He just sat there for a long time before finally driving off. The next morning, a text appeared on my phone from an unknown number. "You think you won, but this isn't over." No name. But I knew. Instead of fear, I felt something else resolve. I wasn't the same woman they'd laughed at over a broken chair. I wasn't the timid landlady who smiled through disrespect. I had become someone who understood her own strength. I called Dalton again. "If they try anything else," I said, "I want to make it official, file a restraining order if necessary." He sighed. "I'll prepare the paperwork, but I doubt he'll go that far. Men like Miles don't handle humiliation well. He'll bark for a while, then disappear." But Miles wasn't the only one unraveling. Alicia emailed me later that week from a new address. She'd moved back to her hometown and wanted to thank me again. "You were right," she wrote. "Respect isn't about class or money, it's about decency. I'll never forget what you taught me." Her words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. I realized then that my quiet revenge had become something larger, an awakening, not just for me, but for those who had wronged me. 2 nights later, however, that peace was interrupted again. Around 11:30 p.m., I heard a loud thump outside, metal against metal. I peeked through the curtains. The trash bins near the curb had been knocked over, garbage scattered across the driveway. At first, I thought it was raccoons. Then I saw a figure walking away, a tall man in a hoodie, his stride familiar. "Miles." I didn't call out. I didn't open the door. I simply picked up my phone and hit record, zooming in just enough to capture his face in the streetlight before he vanished into the dark. The next morning, I forwarded the video to Dalton. His reply was immediate. "That's all I need. You're protected now." It was strange. I wasn't angry. I almost pitied him. He was still fighting a war that had already ended. The following week, A letter arrived from his lawyer threatening to seek damages for wrongful eviction. Dalton handled it with clinical precision. Within days, the case was dismissed. When the ruling came through, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea and read the final line aloud to the roses Richard had planted. Claim denied. Ownership and actions of Miss Hart fully upheld. The words felt like closure, carved in ink. That evening, I walked through the house again. The air was clean, still, peaceful. The floorboards no longer groaned under careless footsteps. My reflection in the hallway mirror seemed different, too stronger, surer. People talk about power like it's loud, obvious, something you can flaunt. But I'd learned that the most powerful thing in the world is quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself anymore. I thought back to that first night, to the broken chair and their laughter. It felt like a lifetime ago. That chair still sat in the corner of my suite. Repaired now. The cracks filled and sanded smooth. I kept it as a reminder, proof that even the things that break can be rebuilt stronger than before. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard a knock on the door. My heart skipped once before I opened it, but it wasn't Miles. It was a delivery man holding a small box. From an Alicia Warren, he said. Inside was a handwritten note and a porcelain teacup, pale blue with gold trim. The note read, "For your peace and for the lessons that made me better." I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. Some people do change. That night, I sipped tea from the new cup and whispered to myself, "It's over." But deep down, I knew stories like mine don't end, they evolve. Miles's pride might fade, but life has a way of circling back, and when it did, I'd be ready not with anger this time, but with grace sharpened to precision. Because revenge might start with pain, but peace is the final strike. And as I blew out the candle beside me, I knew this wasn't just the end of their panic, it was the beginning of my calm. Some victories you celebrate with noise, others, you savor in silence. I chose silence. A month had passed since the eviction dust settled. The house was mine again, empty, quiet, and breathing the way an old home should. Every creak and sigh in the wood sounded like relief. But emptiness can't last forever, not in a house built to be lived in. So I decided it was time to find new tenants, people who would respect it, not just rent it. I called Simone, my realtor and longtime friend, the only person who knew the truth about everything. She'd been there through Richard's illness, through the legal paperwork, through every broken smile I'd had to stitch back together. When she picked up, her voice was warm and direct. "Eveline Hart, finally ready to fill that palace of yours again?" "I'm ready," I said. "But I want to do it my way this time. Quietly. No listings yet. Just a private showing or two." She laughed. "You and your secrets." "All right. What kind of tenants are you looking for?" "Respectful ones," I said. "The kind who don't mistake kindness for permission." She didn't ask for details. She knew better. "I'll send a few prospects tomorrow, no fuss, no pressure." The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows as I opened the curtains in each room. The house gleamed under it, clean, polished, ready for something new. I could still smell faint traces of lemon oil and wood polish. It smelled like a beginning. By noon, Simone arrived with a young couple in tow. They looked to be in their late 20s. The woman, Clara, had gentle eyes and calloused hands that told me she wasn't afraid of work. Her husband, Noah, carried himself with quiet humility. They walked through the front door and immediately took their shoes off. That small gesture alone told me more about their character than any credit score could. "Wow," Clara breathed. "It's beautiful." Noah nodded. "You can feel the history in it." I smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how many people can live in a house without ever really seeing it." Simone shot me a knowing glance but said nothing. As we moved from room to room, Clara asked thoughtful questions about maintenance and utilities, while Noah admired the craftsmanship. When we reached the kitchen, he traced the edge of the marble countertop. "This must have taken ages to restore." "It did," I said. "My husband and I did most of it ourselves." He smiled. then it's not just a house, it's love built into walls. The words hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and nodded. Yes, that's exactly what it is. After the tour, Simone led them outside to discuss details. I stayed behind, looking out the window as the couple spoke in low tones near the garden gate. They weren't loud, or pushy, or entitled. They were soft-spoken, careful, the kind of people who understood gratitude without needing to perform it. Simone returned a few minutes later with a grin. They want it. Full price, no negotiation. They're starting a small family business, and they'd love to make this home their base. That was fast, I said, smiling. Good people know what they want when they see it, she replied. We agreed to finalize paperwork later that week. After she left, I stood alone in the living room, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted by memories or resentment, it felt hopeful again. But that peace was tested sooner than expected. 2 days later, I noticed a car parked across the street. Black sedan, tinted windows. It was subtle, but I'd seen enough of Miles's tactics to recognize one thing. Persistence. He hadn't given up. That night, when I went to take the trash out, the car was gone, but a folded flyer was stuck in my mailbox. It was a printout of an online post, written by Anonymous. The headline read, "Beware dishonest landlady, uses fake name to evict tenants without cause." I didn't need to read the rest. I knew who wrote it. For a moment, anger sparked. Then it fizzled out almost as quickly. People like Miles thrived on reactions, on attention. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, I called Simone. "Do me a favor," I said. "If anyone asks about the house's past tenants, tell them one thing: every home needs cleansing before it can breathe again." She chuckled. Poetic as ever, should I be worried? No, I said softly. You should be proud. We're about to fill this place with good energy again. The next day, Clara and Noah came by to sign the lease. They brought a small bouquet of daisies as a thank you gift. I know landlords don't usually get flowers, Clara said shyly, but it felt right. I smiled. It's perfect, thank you. As they left, Noah turned back at the patient door. You'll visit sometimes, won't you? We'd love to hear stories about the house. Maybe one day, I said. When the time's right. That evening, I sat on the porch with the daisies and a small glass vase beside me. The setting sun painted the sky in soft hues of gold and rose, the same colors Richard used to call healing light. Across the street, the black sedan was gone. I took a deep breath, feeling the calm settle over me like a blanket. I realized then that the most satisfying revenge wasn't destruction, it was restoration. The house wasn't just mine again. It was reborn. And as for Miles, his noise had faded into silence exactly where arrogance belongs. Before heading inside, I took one last look at the garden. The roses swayed gently in the evening breeze, their petals catching the last bits of light. For the first time in a long while, I whispered Richard's name not in grief, but in gratitude. See, love? I murmured. They'll finally take care of our home the way we did. The air was still, the kind of stillness that carries meaning. I turned toward the front door, hand resting on the old brass handle, and smiled to myself. Because some homes don't need new owners, they just need their true ones to remember who they are. Peace has a rhythm, a soft, dependable hum that makes you forget how loud chaos used to be. For nearly 2 months, my life had fallen back into that rhythm. The house felt alive again. Clara and Noah moved in quietly, caring for it with a reverence that warmed me. They'd send me updates through Properties every few weeks, photos of freshly painted shutters, trimmed hedges, and even a cat they'd adopted named Oliver who seemed to think the place was built just for him. For a while, everything was good. Too good. Then, one evening in early spring, that calm fractured. It started with a phone call from Simone. I was in the garden, pruning roses when my phone buzzed. Evening, Simone, I answered cheerfully. Her tone was tight, uncertain. Eveline, I think you need to see this. She texted me a link. It was another online post, this time on a local community board. The headline read, "Hidden slumlord scams tenants with false identities, new couple beware." My stomach turned as I read the article. It painted me as a manipulative, deceitful landlord who preyed on naive tenants. It mentioned the address of my property, my home, and claimed I'd unlawfully evicted hard-working young professionals and hid behind fake management companies. The writer hadn't even bothered to disguise his tone. I could hear Miles in every word. Simone sighed on the other end. "I've already flagged it for removal, but you know how these things spread." "I do," I said, the calm in my voice surprising even me. "Let him shout. Eventually, he'll run out of breath." But it didn't stop there. A few days later, Clara called me. "Mrs. Hart," she said, her voice small. "I don't know if you've seen it, but someone left flyers in the mailbox. They say awful things about you about this house." "I have," I said gently. "Don't worry about it. It's just noise." She hesitated. "Noah wants to call the police." "That won't be necessary," I said. "This is mine to handle." After we hung up, I sat in silence, the air thick with something I hadn't felt in a long time, not fear, not anger, but resolve. Miles's arrogance had returned, uglier this time, desperate. It wasn't about the house anymore, it was about pride. He couldn't stand that I'd moved on. That my life had continued without him as a footnote. That night, I wrote his name on a small notepad and drew a single line through it. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. I wasn't that broken woman he once laughed at. He'd already taken enough of my energy. Still, arrogance rarely disappears quietly. A week later, I was driving home from the market when I saw his car. The same black sedan, parked 2 houses down from mine. He was sitting inside, watching. Again. I parked, locked my doors, and went straight inside. My hands didn't shake this time. I simply called Dalton. "I think Miles is back," I said. "He's been harassing me and spreading lies online." "I'll make a few calls," Dalton said, his tone clipped. "If he's violating the cease and desist, we'll press charges." "Good," I replied. "But don't rush. I want to see just how far arrogance takes him before the law catches up." That night, rain poured against the windows, and I found myself sitting by the fire, thinking about how arrogance always circles back like a storm revisiting old ground. The people who think they've won can't stand to see the world move on without them. The next morning, I woke to something unexpected. A letter. Not typed, not printed, handwritten in a sloppy scrawl. It was shoved under my door. "Eveline, you can pretend all you want, but everyone knows what you did. I'll make sure no one rents from you again. You humiliated me, and now it's your turn. M." I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it in an envelope marked "Evidence." Then I went to the porch, looked across the street, and smiled at the sight of his car still sitting there. If Miles wanted a confrontation, he would get one, but on my terms. That afternoon, I invited Simone and Dalton to the house. They arrived together, umbrellas dripping. I showed them the letter and pointed out the car. Dalton glanced through the window, his mouth tightening. "You've given him too much room already." "Not much longer," I said. Simone crossed her arms. "You want to catch him, don't you?" I smiled faintly. "No, I want him to see that he's already lost." We filed a police report that evening. The officers were polite, professional. They promised to patrol the street and issue a warning if they caught him loitering. But life has its own way of setting the stage for justice. 2 days later, Clara and Noah were hosting a small housewarming barbecue. They'd invited neighbors, Simone, and even me. I almost declined, but something in me wanted to be there to see joy in this house again. By late afternoon, laughter filled the backyard. Kids played on the grass. The smell of grilled vegetables mingled with warm sunlight. For once, the house felt truly alive. Then, in the distance, I heard the low rumble of an engine idling. I turned. There, just beyond the hedges, was the black sedan. Miles. He hadn't expected to see me among the guests. Our eyes met across the street. For a moment, I saw it clearly, the flicker of disbelief. the crumble of whatever illusion of power he still had. I raised my glass to him. Slowly. Calmly. Then I turned back to the laughter behind me. That simple gesture broke him more effectively than any confrontation ever could. He revved the engine once, twice, then sped off. Later that evening, as twilight draped over the garden, a police officer knocked on the gate. "Mrs. Hart?" he asked. "We found that black car a few blocks down. The driver was pulled over for harassment and reckless driving. Turns out there's an outstanding complaint under your name. You're safe now." I thanked him, closed the gate, and leaned against it for a long, steady breath. The air was clean again, the noise gone. When I stepped back into the garden, Clara handed me a plate of food and smiled. "Everything all right?" "Perfect," I said. "Just tying up old threads." That night, as I watched the lights go out room by room, I felt a peace deeper than I'd ever known. I wasn't just the woman who'd been mocked anymore. I was the woman who'd rebuilt, restored, and risen without shouting once. Arrogance had returned, tried to bite, and choked on its own bitterness. And as I locked the door behind me, I realized the real. Revenge wasn't making Miles pay, it was living a life he'd never be invited into again. Dusk has a way of softening everything. Anger. Pride. Even old fears. That evening, though, it sharpened every shadow. It was about a week after the barbecue, a quiet Sunday that smelled of cut grass and cooling rain. I'd spent most of the afternoon in the garden, pruning the roses while Oliver, the tenant's cat, watched from the porch rail like a small, silent guard. The neighborhood had slipped back into its peaceful rhythm. Clara and Noah had settled beautifully. Laughter drifted through their kitchen window, the kind of laughter that made this house feel young again. I was just rinsing my gardening shears when I saw the shape of a man standing by the gate. The sun was almost gone, and he was half in shadow, half in that last strip of fading light. My breath caught. Miles. He wasn't supposed to be here. After the police warning, after everything, I thought he'd finally vanished from my story. But there he was, thinner, unshaven, his once expensive suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. I dried my hands slowly and stepped onto the porch. "You shouldn't be here," I said. He tried to smile, but it came out crooked. "Relax, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to talk." The wind carried his voice across the yard, thin and brittle. "You had months to talk," I replied. "You chose shouting instead." He ran a hand through his hair. "I know. Look, I lost my job, my apartment, everything. You were right. All right? I treated you terribly. I just thought maybe if I explained..." "Explained what?" I asked quietly. "That arrogance cost you something?" He looked down. "You don't have to enjoy this so much." "I don't," I said. And it was true. What I felt wasn't triumph anymore, it was pity edged with caution. "But actions have ripples, Miles, you made yours." He took a hesitant step closer to the gate. "Could we at least talk inside? I'm freezing." "No," I said. "This is close enough." For a moment, the only sound was the creak of the gate between us and the whisper of the wind through the ivy. The sky behind him had turned the color of bruised peaches, streaked with fading gold. Beautiful, but dying fast. He sighed. "I wanted to apologize. You didn't deserve what we did. The chair, the laughing god, when I think about it now." I studied him. There was sincerity there, but also exhaustion, the kind that doesn't come just from guilt, but from consequences finally catching up. "I don't need your apology," I said softly. "But maybe you need to give it." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I do. You taught me something. Even if I hated you for it." I tilted my head. "What's that?" "That respect isn't optional," he said. "And that some people have more power than they ever show." The honesty in his voice surprised me. For a brief moment, the bitterness between us dissolved, leaving only two people standing on opposite sides of a lesson learned too late. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "This is for you," I sold some things. Figured I should help pay for the damage we caused. It's not much, but it's something. I didn't move to take it. You keep it, I said. You'll need it more than I do. He shook his head. Please, let me do one decent thing. Reluctantly, I stepped forward and took the envelope through the gate. His hand brushed mine for an instant, cold, trembling, human. Thank you, he whispered. Goodbye, Miles, I said, turning toward the house. Eveline? I paused. Do you ever think you went too far? I looked back at him. No, I said. I think for once in my life I went exactly as far as I needed to. He nodded slowly, almost in acceptance. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing down the street until the dusk swallowed him whole. I stood there for a long moment after he was gone, the envelope heavy in my hand. Inside, I found a small wad of bills and a note written in the same uneven handwriting. You were right. I never owned anything, not really, but you did. Take care of it. I read it twice before tucking it back inside and sliding the envelope into the pocket of my apron. Forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken to be real. Sometimes it's just a quiet choice not to hate anymore. When I went back inside, the warmth of the house met me like an embrace. The faint hum of Clara's laughter drifted through the vents. Life had moved on, as it always does, indifferent but persistent. Later, when the sky was fully dark, I stepped out again to close the garden gate. The street was empty, the air cool and still. The same moon that had watched me crumble months ago now shone down on a woman unbroken. I whispered into the quiet, "Good luck, Miles, wherever you land." Then I locked the gate. Back inside, I poured myself a glass of red wine and sat by the repaired chair, the very one that had once splintered beneath me. I ran my hand along its smooth edge, tracing where the cracks used to be. It wasn't perfect, the lines of repair were still faintly visible. But that was the point. Perfection hides stories. Imperfection proves survival. As I sat there, the clock ticked softly, steady as a heartbeat. I realized the house had gone utterly still, again not empty this time, but peaceful. Maybe the visit at dusk wasn't a threat. Maybe it was closure arriving late, limping but sincere. Either way, I knew this much. The same dusk that once hid my humiliation now witnessed my peace, and I wouldn't let anyone steal that light again. Morning came quietly, the way healing always does, without fanfare, without applause. Just light creeping through curtains and the faint aroma of coffee from Clara's kitchen upstairs. I woke later than usual that day. Maybe because for the first time in a long time, there wasn't a battle waiting for me. Miles was gone, and with him, the tension that had haunted the walls of my home. Still, something lingered, a feeling like unfinished business humming just beneath the surface. When I made my way to the kitchen, the envelope he'd given me sat, where I'd left it the night before, beside a half-empty glass of wine. I had tucked it away, meaning to forget it, but I couldn't. I picked it up again, running my thumb along the edges, feeling the roughness of the paper. Inside were those few crumpled bills and his note. I unfolded it once more, reading the words in the dim morning light. You were right. I never owned anything. Not really. But you did. Take care of it. It wasn't a confession or an apology. It was an acknowledgement, small, imperfect, but real. I found myself whispering, "You learned the hard way, didn't you?" Part of me wanted to throw the letter out, to let it vanish with all the other debris of the past. But something in it felt important, like a relic of a war survived. So, instead, I placed it in the old wooden box where I kept things Richard had written me over the years. Postcards, love notes, bits of his handwriting that reminded me he'd existed. The box was more than memory, it was a record of the lessons that built me. As I closed the lid, I realized Miles's letter belonged there too, not because it carried love, but because it carried truth. Later that morning, Clara came downstairs holding a plate of fresh muffins. "Morning, Mrs. Hart," she said, smiling. "I made extras, blueberry." "You spoil me," I said, taking one. She hesitated before speaking again. "Noah told me what happened the other night. With that man at the gate." Are you all right? I nodded. I'm fine. Some people need to see where their pride takes them before they understand the lesson. Clara frowned slightly. Do you think he meant it? The apology? Yes, I said after a moment. But forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about freeing yourself from who you were when you were hurt. She nodded thoughtfully. You always sound like you've lived 3 lives, Mrs. Hart. I smiled faintly. In some ways, I have. After she went back upstairs, I sat on the porch with my coffee and stared at the garden. The roses had begun to open again, tender and defiant all at once. I remembered planting them with Richard one summer, the sun beating down, our hands dirty, our laughter loud. He used to say, "Everything that grows strong starts in the dirt." That line had carried me through widowhood, humiliation, revenge, and now, this unexpected calm. But that morning, I finally understood it differently. It wasn't about the pain that created strength, it was about the choice to bloom despite it. Just as I set my mug down, a car pulled up to the curb. For a second, my heart jumped, but it wasn't Miles. It was the mailman. He waved cheerfully and handed me a stack of envelopes. Bills, advertisements, and one small cream-colored envelope with my name handwritten across the front. No return address. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page of thick paper. The handwriting elegant and unfamiliar. Dear Mrs. Hart, my name is Margaret Hill, and I'm the mother of Alicia Warren. She told me about you, about what happened, about how she learned more from you in 6 months than she did in years of schooling. I wanted to thank you. She's different now, steadier, wiser. She's saving for her own small place and says it's because of the lesson the landlady taught me. You changed her life, and by extension, you changed mine. With gratitude, Margaret's eyes stared at the letter until my eyes blurred. There was no anger, no revenge in those words, only grace. It was as if life had decided to balance the scales quietly, in a way I never expected. I folded the letter and placed it beside Miles's note in the box. 2 pieces, of the same story, one born of arrogance, the other of redemption. The rest of the day passed peacefully. I cleaned, read, cooked a small meal for myself. But my mind kept circling back to that letter, and what it represented. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same house that had once been the stage for humiliation had now become a place where lessons were born. When evening came, I sat by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. The air smelled of rain and earth, that scent that always made me feel both grounded and small. It occurred to me then that life's greatest lessons rarely arrive wrapped in kindness. They come disguised as broken chairs, cruel laughter, sleepless nights, and handwritten notes that sting before they soothe. And yet, when you gather them all, the pain, the patience, the victories, they form something beautiful, wisdom. I thought of Alicia's mother again. I thought of Clara and Noah upstairs, filling the house with warmth. I thought of Richard, somewhere beyond reach, smiling at the woman I'd finally become. In that moment, I understood that revenge had never really been my story's purpose. It was the catalyst, not the ending. What I'd built now was something far more lasting, a legacy of quiet strength. As the clock ticked softly beside me, I whispered to myself, every wound has a lesson. And when you stop running from it, that's when you heal. I reached for my journal, the one I'd been writing in since Richard's passing, and opened to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, "The lesson of the chair." Underneath, I began, "Sometimes they give you a broken seat because they think you don't belong at the table. What they don't know is that you own the house the table sits in. Let them laugh. One day, they'll understand that quiet dignity is louder than all their noise combined." I closed the book, a small smile tugging at my lips. It was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming the voice I'd lost, muted for too long. And as dusk settled over the house once more, I realized something simple but powerful. You don't always have to fight to win. Sometimes you just have to stand still long enough for the truth to catch up. Life has a strange sense of timing. Just when you think you've turned the final page of a chapter, it hands you a letter you never saw coming. 2 weeks after Alicia's mother wrote to me, I was in the middle of repotting a plant in the sunroom when my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number, but something about the area code caught my eye. It was local, Mrs. Hart? A man's voice asked when I answered. This is Daniel Reeves from the city's Historic Preservation Council. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I brushed the dirt off my hands. Not at all. What can I do for you? Well, he said, your property was nominated by a local resident for inclusion on our heritage register. I'd like to meet with you to discuss restoration grants and potential public partnerships. I blinked, unsure I'd heard him right. Nominated? By whom? He chuckled. The form doesn't require a name, just documentation. Whoever it was sent photographs of your house, details about the architecture, even a short write-up about its history. It's beautifully written. My fingers tightened around the phone. There was only one person I could think of who'd cared enough to notice such things, Clara. We arranged to meet that Friday. When Daniel arrived, he was a tall, kind-eyed man in his 50s, the kind of person who spoke softly but confidently. He stepped inside the foyer and looked around with open admiration. You've kept it in remarkable condition, he said. The craftsmanship, the crown molding, the original staircase, it's all still intact. I smiled. It's been a labor of love. He nodded. That's exactly why we're here. We'd like to feature your home in the city's heritage tour this summer. It would mean a plaque out front, a preservation grant, and if you're open to it, a brief story about the family who built it. I hesitated. A story? Yes. People love stories. They connect better when they know who lived within these walls, how the home came to be. I could almost hear Richard's voice. Every home tells a story, Eve. Some just need someone brave enough to tell it. Daniel smiled gently. Would you consider it? I looked around the sunlight spilling across the banister, the faint sound of Clara laughing upstairs, the air thick with the scent of lilies and old wood polish. For so long I'd hidden this place, guarded it like a secret. Now, for the first time, I wanted to share it. I would, I said. But I'd like to write the story myself. He beamed. I was hoping you'd say that. After he left, I sat at the dining table with a blank sheet of paper before me. It had been years since I'd written anything beyond lists and letters, but words started flowing almost immediately. I wrote about Richard and the summers we spent sanding floors, about laughter echoing through the halls, about love that aged gracefully like the wood beneath our hands. And then, after a long pause, I wrote about the broken chair, not in anger or bitterness, but as a symbol, a lesson in humility, ownership, and quiet strength. When I was done, I read it aloud. The house seemed to listen, every creak and sigh echoing softly in approval. That evening, I brought the draft upstairs to show Clara. She was at the kitchen counter, flour dusting her hands as she kneaded bread dough. I thought you might like to read this, I said, sliding the pages toward her. She wiped her hands and began reading. As she reached the part about the broken chair, her eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Hart, she whispered. This is beautiful. Do you think it's too personal? No, she said firmly. It's honest. And people need honest. The next day, I submitted the story to Daniel. He called within hours. It's perfect, he said. You have a gift, Mrs. Hart. The way you turned hardship into grace, it's inspiring. I thanked him quietly, my heart swelling with something I hadn't felt in years, pride without bitterness. A week later, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. For a second, old fear gripped me, but it wasn't Miles. A woman in a navy blazer stepped out and introduced herself as Amelia Cross, editor of the Haven Review, a regional lifestyle magazine. I came across your heritage story, she said. We'd love to feature you and your home in our next issue. It's rare to find a story so personal and so hopeful. Would you allow us to do an interview? I nearly laughed. You want to interview me? The woman who once got laughed at over a broken chair? She smiled warmly. The woman who turned that laughter into wisdom. Her sincerity disarmed me. All right, I said. But only if we talk about the lessons, not the people. Agreed. The interview took place the following week. She asked about the house's history, about Richard, about the repairs and restoration. When she asked about the harder years, I told her the truth but gently. I learned, I said, that people will test your worth to see if you know it yourself. Once you do, no one can take it from you again. When the article came out a month later, it was titled "The House That Taught Dignity." It featured photos of the gardens, the sunroom, and me standing by the repaired chair. Underneath it read, "She was once mocked in her own home. Today, she teaches others how to protect theirs with grace, patience, and quiet strength." I didn't realize how much it would mean to me until I saw it in print. Not because of vanity, but because it proved something I'd always believed: stories matter when they heal. A week later, my mailbox overflowed with letters. From widows, single mothers, young women, even men who had lost everything and were rebuilding. They thanked me for reminding them that dignity isn't lost in defeat, it's built in recovery. One letter, though, stood out. It was from Alicia again. "I saw your article," my mother cried when she read it. "You turned pain into a legacy, Mrs. Hart. I'm proud I knew you." I folded her letter gently, adding it to the wooden box with the others. The collection was growing pieces of my past, becoming proof that every hardship had been worth something. That night, as the crickets sang and the house glowed softly under lamplight, I stood by the window and whispered, "We did it, Richard." Because this peace, this recognition, this transformation was the offer I never expected. Not money, not praise, but purpose. The world had once given me a broken chair. Now, it was giving me a seat at the table I built myself. I used to think the past stayed where you left it. But sometimes it circles back not to hurt you, but to see if you've really learned. It had been 3 months since the article was published. The house had become a small local landmark, its story shared among neighbors and even featured in the city's annual Heritage Walk. Strangers stopped by to take photos of the old Victorian with the white trim and rose bushes. Some even left flowers on the gate with little notes that said things like, "For strength" or "For grace." I'd gotten used to it, the quiet admiration. The occasional knock from a passerby wanting to see the famous "chair of dignity," as some called it now. It was strange, but comforting. Life had softened again. The storms had passed. Until one gray afternoon in late autumn. The wind had picked up, rattling the window panes as I sat by the fire reading letters from readers. One in particular made me smile. It was from a young woman in Oregon who wrote, "I watched people laugh at me once, and I thought of you." I stood up straighter. I was still holding that letter when I heard a car pull up. Tires crunched over gravel. And a moment later, someone knocked on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a rush of cold air swept in, and behind it, a familiar face. Tara! She stood there, clutching a coat around her. Her once golden hair now a little darker. Her makeup minimal. She looked older, not by years but by life. "Mrs. Hart?" she said, her voice small. "I wasn't sure if you'd even open the door." I took a slow breath. "Tara. I don't want to intrude. I just wanted to see you. To see the house." Her eyes flicked past me, landing on the foyer. I could tell she was remembering the parties. The laughter. The night of the broken chair. I stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated, then entered quietly. The warmth from the fireplace brushed against her cheeks, and she shivered slightly. I led her to the sitting room, where she paused, looking around like she was walking through a memory she no longer recognized. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Even more than I remembered." "It's peaceful now," I said simply. She nodded, still looking everywhere but at me. Finally, she sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded tightly in her lap. "I heard about the article," she said. "About the Heritage Award. You deserve it. Thank you." Silence stretched between us. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Miles told me what happened between you two. The letter. The police. I see." I said, my tone neutral. He's not doing well, she continued. After everything, he just couldn't get back on his feet. I tried to help, but I think he's too proud to accept help from anyone. I studied her face, there was no defiance there anymore, only guilt. Maybe even remorse. Why are you really here, Tara? I asked softly. She swallowed hard. Because I never said I was sorry, not properly. I stayed quiet, letting her speak. That night with the chair. Her voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. We were trying to make fun of each other, not you. And when it broke, we laughed because we were embarrassed. Because we didn't know how cruel we looked. I stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in her eyes. Embarrassment and cruelty often wear the same mask, I said. She nodded, tears gathering. You were so kind to us, and we treated you like nothing. And then when you revealed who you were, I hated you for making me feel small. But now I realize, you didn't make me feel that way. I did that to myself. I let out a slow breath. Her words weren't easy to hear, not because they hurt, but because they reminded me of a version of her I'd once pitied more than despised. I'm glad you understand that, I said quietly. Life has a way of teaching us lessons until we finally listen. She gave a shaky laugh. It's been teaching me a lot lately. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the soft crackle of the fire. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small object, a delicate ceramic figurine of a rose, glazed in a pale pink. I saw this at a market, she said, placing it gently on the table between us. It reminded me of the garden. I thought maybe you'd like it. I picked it up, turning it in the light. It was simple, a little chipped, but beautiful in its imperfection. Thank you, I said. She exhaled, relief flooding her face. I wasn't sure you'd even take it. I smiled faintly. You've grown, Tara. Not as much as I should have, she said. But I'm trying. I studied her for a moment longer. That's enough for now. Her eyes glistened as she stood. You don't know how much I needed to hear that. I walked her to the door. The wind had died down and the last light of evening painted the sky in muted lavender. She paused on the porch, looking out over the garden. It's funny, she said softly. When we lived here, I thought this house was too big, too old, too quiet. Now it feels like the only place that makes sense. It always made sense, I said. You just weren't ready to listen to it. She turned to me, tears threatening again. Goodbye, Mrs. Hart. And thank you for everything. Goodbye, Tara, I said. Take care of yourself. She walked down the path, her figure fading into the dusk. For a long time, I stood there, the ceramic rose still warm in my hand. When I went back inside, I placed it on the mantel beside the repaired chair. It looked right there, delicate but steady, a symbol of something broken, learning to be whole again. Later, as the stars appeared one by one, I thought of all the faces this house had seen: Richard's, the tenants, Miles's, Tara's, and how every one of them had left behind something intangible. Lessons. Regrets. Gratitude. Change. I sat down by the fire, closing my eyes. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it just stops it from poisoning the future. And in that quiet house, surrounded by warmth and the soft scent of roses, I realized the truth. The past hadn't returned to haunt me, it had returned to thank me. Gratitude has a sound, it's softer than applause, quieter than praise. It's the rustle of paper when someone writes, "Thank you," and means it. 2 weeks after Tara's visit, an envelope arrived at my door with no return address. Inside was a small card that read, "For teaching without humiliation, and forgiving without permission." There was no signature, but I knew the handwriting. Tara's. I placed the card in my wooden box alongside all the others, the letter from Alicia's mother, Miles's note, and countless messages from strangers who'd found something healing in my story. That little box had become more than a collection of letters. It was a testament to endurance, to quiet victories, To every moment I'd refused to bow to bitterness. Life had found a new rhythm since then. The city's Heritage Council had confirmed my home's official status as a historic landmark. Clara and Noah had decided to renew their lease for another year. They said the house felt alive, like it had adopted them as much as they'd adopted it. And Simone, ever the optimist, suggested I host a small gathering to celebrate the recognition. A celebration? I asked, half amused. She smiled. You've spent years surviving, Eveline. It's time to live a little. I laughed softly. You just want an excuse for champagne. Maybe, she admitted, but it's well-deserved. The idea lingered in my mind for days. The house had witnessed so many things: sorrow, humiliation, confrontation, but never true celebration. Maybe it was time to change that. So, I decided to do it. Not a grand event, just a gathering of the people who had walked with me through the fire and stayed. Clara and Noah helped plan it, insisting on handling the catering themselves. You've done enough work for this house, Noah said. Let us take care of you for once. On the evening of the gathering, golden light poured through the windows, glinting off the newly polished floors. Fresh flowers lined the mantel: white lilies, pink roses, and wild daisies, each chosen with quiet intention. I wore a navy blue dress that had belonged to Richard's mother, simple but dignified. Guests began to arrive one by one. Simone, her laughter as warm as always. Daniel from the Preservation Council, carrying a framed certificate for the house's designation, and even a few neighbors who'd become friends over the years. As people filled the rooms, soft music floated through the air. The house, once filled with mockery and arrogance, now buzzed with joy. I could almost feel its walls sighing in contentment. At one point, Clara took the floor to make a toast. She raised her glass, her voice steady but full of emotion. To Mrs. Hart, she said. To the woman who taught us that dignity doesn't shout, it simply stands its ground. This house is more than wood and stone. It's a living reminder that grace wins every time. Applause rippled through the room, gentle but sincere. My throat tightened as I smiled back at them. When it was my turn to speak, I hesitated, looking around at all the faces glowing in the candlelight. I never thought this house would see a night like this, I began. For a long time it was just a shelter, a place to hide my grief, my silence, and later, my anger. But it's become something else now, a witness to transformation. Not just mine, but everyone who's crossed its threshold. I paused, my gaze lingering on Clara and Noah, then Simone. Every scar in these walls tells a story. Every repaired crack reminds me that broken things can still hold beauty. And every person here tonight proves that kindness doesn't make you weak, it makes you unbreakable. There was a quiet moment after that, a collective breath. Like everyone in the room understood the weight of what wasn't being said. After the toast, the evening unfolded gently. Laughter mingled with the clinking of glasses, and soft piano music hummed in the background. I drifted between conversations, feeling the energy of the room like a heartbeat, steady, warm, alive. Then, as the sky outside deepened to twilight, Simone took my hand and whispered, "There's someone outside asking for you." I frowned slightly but followed her to the porch. Standing at the gate was Alicia. She looked radiant, older and steadier than I remembered. Her hair was shorter now, her eyes clearer. "Mrs. Hart," she said with a wide smile. "I hope it's all right that I came. Your article changed my life. I'm studying property management now, real estate actually. Find homes that make them feel safe, like you did for me." Emotion welled up in my chest. "That's wonderful, Alicia. Truly." She nodded. "I owe it to you." "No," I said gently. "You owe it to yourself for listening." We hugged then, something I never thought I'd share with any of my former tenants. But it wasn't awkward, it was real. Inside, the party continued, laughter spilling through the open windows. For a moment, I just stood there on the porch beside Alicia, watching the house glow from within. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Like it forgave us, too." I smiled. Maybe it did. When she left, I returned to the party, feeling lighter than I had in years. The night stretched on, filled with the kind of warmth that doesn't fade when the lights go out. After the guests had gone and the house had gone quiet again, I walked through each room slowly, extinguishing candles one by one. The scent of roses and champagne lingered in the air. When I reached the living room, I stopped beside the repaired chair. Someone, probably Clara, had placed a small note on the cushion. It read, "Thank you for teaching us that even broken things can hold us up again." Tears filled my eyes. I sat down in that chair, its wood solid and comforting beneath me, and whispered, "You're welcome." Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, and the moonlight spilled softly across the garden. I realized then that gratitude wasn't something people gave you, it was something you earned by surviving with grace. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the caretaker of this house. I felt like its heart. Because sometimes life doesn't reward you with riches or revenge, it rewards you with peace, and the sound of people saying thank you when they finally understand. I used to think closure was something that arrived with fanfare, a moment so clear and resounding that it erased every ache before it. But now, standing on the porch of my home as the sun dipped below the horizon, I realize that closure is quieter than that. It doesn't shout, it settles, like dust after a storm. The house was empty that evening. Clara and Noah had gone away for the weekend, leaving me to water the plants and keep an eye on Oliver, who was curled up on the windowsill, purring softly. The last of the celebration flowers still stood on the table, their petals fading but graceful even in their surrender. I carried a mug of tea to the porch and sank into the old rocking chair, the one Richard used to sit in. The air smelled of pine and cooling earth. I could hear the faint hum of the neighborhood, the distant bark of a dog, the whisper of the wind against the roses. It was peaceful, so peaceful I almost didn't trust it. It's strange how a house can carry the timeline of your entire life within its walls. I could look at each window, each stair, and know exactly what part of my story it belonged to. The corner by the fireplace where Richard proposed. The hallway where laughter once spilled from dinner parties. The landing where my heart had broken as a chair collapsed beneath me. The kitchen where I learned to build myself again. One quiet morning at a time. I had lived 100 lives in this house. Tonight, it felt like all of them were finally resting. The sunset painted the sky in colors too beautiful to describe: rose, amber, a thread of lavender weaving between clouds. I thought of Richard and what he used to say whenever he caught me staring at the sky like this. "It's the world's way of saying thank you for another day." I smiled softly. "You're right again, love," I whispered. Inside, the clock ticked gently. The steady rhythm reminded me of my heartbeat. Constant. Unhurried. I had spent so many years racing time, trying to outlive pain, outgrow humiliation, outwork grief. Now, for the first time, I was content to simply keep pace with it. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled the small wooden box. The one filled with letters, Miles's note, Alicia's mother's letter, Tara's card, all the echoes of my story. I opened it and ran my fingers over the edges of the papers. They weren't reminders of pain anymore. They were proof of healing. Every piece represented someone who had changed, including me. I took out the card Tara had sent, the one that said, "For teaching without humiliation, and forgiving without permission." I smiled at the words. Forgiving without permission, that was the part that had taken me the longest to understand. Forgiveness wasn't for the ones who hurt you. It was the act of reclaiming the parts of yourself they couldn't break. I set the box beside me on the porch railing. The last rays of sunlight glinted off the wood, turning it gold for a fleeting moment. Then, in the distance, I heard a car slow near the gate. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, but no, it was real. A familiar figure stepped out. Miles. He looked older, thinner. But there was a calmness about him I hadn't seen before. He didn't try to come closer. He just stood by the gate, hands in his pockets, watching the house. Our eyes met across the distance, and for the first time, there was no anger, no shame, only understanding. He gave me a small nod, almost a bow, then turned and walked away. No words, No need. As his car disappeared down the road, I felt an odd warmth in my chest, not love, not pity, but something gentler. Acceptance. Life has a way of tying its own loose ends, even when you've long stopped tugging at them. The sun dipped lower, and shadows lengthened across the porch. The air turned cool, brushing against my cheeks. I looked down at the repaired chair beside me, the one that had once symbolized humiliation but now stood as proof of resilience. I ran my hand over its polished surface, tracing the faint scars in the wood. "They never really go away, do they?" I whispered. "The cracks. But that was all right. Some things aren't meant to disappear. They're meant to remind us of what we survived." The first star blinked into the deepening sky. I could almost hear Richard's laugh in the breeze, faint but unmistakable. "You did well, Eve," I imagined him saying. "You finally built a piece big enough for both of us." Tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness but gratitude. I thought of all the people who had come and gone, the arrogant tenants who taught me where my boundaries were, the kind ones who showed me how to open my heart again, the letters from strangers who'd found hope in my story. I realized, sitting there, that my life had become something far larger than the pain that once defined it. I wasn't just the woman with the broken chair anymore. I was the woman who turned a moment of ridicule into a lifetime of quiet strength. As the horizon swallowed the last of the light, I whispered the words that had lived inside me for years but had never made it past my lips. "I forgive you all. And I forgive myself, too." The words floated into the dusk, soft but certain, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely free. When I finally stood, the sky had turned navy, stars scattered like blessings across the dark. I picked up the wooden box, carried it inside, and placed it gently on the mantel beside the rose figurine Tara had given me. The firelight flickered across them both, two symbols of lessons learned the hard way. Before heading to bed, I took one last look around the living room. It was warm, welcoming, alive with the kind of peace that only comes after everything else has burned away. The house was no longer a monument to my pain. It was my triumph, my classroom, my sanctuary. As I climbed the stairs, I whispered one final promise to myself and to the walls that had carried every version of me. This is the life I built from the ashes, and I will live it with grace. When I reached the top landing, I glanced through the window at the sky one last time. The last blush of sunset still clung faintly to the edge of the horizon, a final, lingering gift. I smiled and said softly, "Thank you." Then I turned out the light. And in that quiet, under that final sunset, I knew my story had come full circle, not with revenge, but with peace earned one patient heartbeat at a time.